Hi, my name is Jacob George, and today we're talking about the Ascension of Jesus Christ. We often think about the birth of Jesus, Christmas, his suffering and death, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday, the resurrection of Jesus, Easter Sunday. But we seldom think about the ascension of Christ. In fact, Jesus' work on earth doesn't end until the ascension. The incarnation, when God descends to earth, takes on humanity, is closely linked with the ascension when Christ ascends into heaven with his humanity. Now, reading from the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "He presented himself alive to them by many proofs after he had suffered, appearing to them during 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God." So for 40 days between Easter, the resurrection, and the ascension of Christ into heaven, Jesus appears to his disciples, eats with them, shows them his glorified body with his wounds still visible, and he tells them about the kingdom of God. Now, after these 40 days, Jesus ascends into heaven. Reading from the book of Luke, chapter 20, verses 50 to 53, it says, from the book of Luke, chapter 24, it says, "Then he led them out as far as Bethany, raised his hands and blessed them. As he blessed them, he parted from them and was taken up to heaven. They did him homage and then returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were continually in the temple praising God." So Jesus' ascension is very significant. One aspect to consider is that in the Old Testament, the high priest of the temple, once every year on the Day of Atonement, would enter the Holy of Holies, the sanctuary, and offer the sacrifice once a year for the sins of the nation. Jesus is the eternal priest who offers this sacrifice for all of eternity when he ascends into heaven. Reading from the book of Hebrews, chapter 9, verses 24 to 26, it says, "For Christ did not enter into a sanctuary made by hands, a copy of the true one, but heaven itself, that he might now appear before God on our behalf. Not that he might offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters each year into the sanctuary with blood that is not his own. If that were so, he would have had to suffer repeatedly from the foundation of the world. But now, once for all, he has appeared at the end of the ages to take away sin by his sacrifice." So Jesus is the eternal priest, enters into the sanctuary, not made by human hands, which the priest in the Old Testament would enter, but the true sanctuary, which is heaven itself. And Jesus, the eternal priest, offers the eternal sacrifice, one in heaven that is not bound by time and space. Now, reading from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 662, it says, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." The lifting up of Jesus on the cross signifies and announces his lifting up by his ascension into heaven, and indeed begins it. Jesus Christ, the one priest of the new and eternal covenant, entered not into a sanctuary made by human hands, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. There Christ permanently exercises his priesthood, for he always lives to make intercession for those who draw near to God through him. As a high priest of the good things to come, he is the center and principal actor of the liturgy that honors the Father in heaven. In fact, every time you go for Mass, you see the priest at Mass participates in this eternal sacrifice offered by our high priest, who is Jesus in heaven. And that's what makes Mass so beautiful and is supposed to be holy and glorifies our Father in heaven. Now, reading from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we see that Christ's ascension doesn't just talk about Jesus' spirit going into heaven, but in fact his glorified body. So there's significance that his humanity also is taken into heaven. Reading from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 665, it says, Christ's ascension marks the definitive entrance of Jesus' humanity into God's heavenly domain, whence he will come again. So the whence he will come again is about Jesus coming, the second coming, where Jesus comes to judge the living and the dead. And we don't know when that is going to happen. But what's really fascinating is that it talks about Jesus' humanity into God's heavenly domain. Paragraph 659 says, the irreversible entry of his humanity into divine glory, symbolized by the cloud and by heaven, where he is seated from that time forward at God's right hand. Irreversible entry of his humanity into divine glory. So something to think about is that Jesus coming as a human, of course, is to pay the price of sin. And he does all of this out of love. And we think about his suffering and his death, what he endured to pay for the price of sin for your sake and mine. But when Jesus assumes his humanity as well, he also shows us how to be truly human. The perfect man is Jesus Christ. He shows us how we are to love God and love our neighbor. And in that order. Now Jesus understands all that we go through, all that we suffer, all that we endure, all our temptations, every little bit of it, because he was human too. Fully divine, but fully human. Reading from the book of Hebrews, chapter 4, verses 14 to 16, it says, Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has similarly been tested in every way, yet without sin. So let us confidently approach the throne of grace to receive mercy and to find grace for timely help. So I love the aspect that's talked about here, that Jesus, the eternal high priest, is not one who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been similarly tested in every way without sin. He sets an example for us to overcome sin, to overcome our temptations, our struggles. But he also tells us that I can understand what you go through. Now I can tell about a friend who suffered through something, and I can tell them that I can understand what you're going through, but never actually go through it and never actually know it fully, because I never go through it myself. But Jesus endured every kind of testing. And he can sympathize with you, even when your parents, your brother, your friend, your best friend, your wife, none of them can sympathize. You don't have a God who's distant from us. You have a God who's so close that he understands you more than you understand yourself. God is more father than any father, more a mother than any mother, and more a friend than any friend. He understands you. He invites you. It says that we can confidently approach the throne of grace to receive mercy. And we've talked about God's divine mercy, abundant, everlasting. We're never too distant from it. We always have hope. So be it whatever struggle that we're going through, depression, loneliness, lack of people understanding us, our temptations, our trials, our sufferings, all of it, we have a God who understands every little detail of our lives. In fact, He's endured all that we endure. He's been abandoned, physically, mentally, tortured. He suffered. He cried. He sang hymns. God's not distant from us. And Jesus coming down as a human also shows us that we don't have a God who's distant from us. I can tell you all about love, but if I don't show it myself, am I truly practicing what I preach? Christ, the perfect man, comes, shows us, tells us about love, proves His love for us, dies for us, and He calls you and me to be children of God.